Okay.
He's meeting me at like 92 and 575.
Okay. Pick some.
Okay.
Oh man, I can get chat on here now. All right, we're gonna test this. I know, on Switcher.
Tell everyone in the group I said hi. Sorry I didn't stay in the group longer.
Wrong group. All right, guys. I don't know if anyone is hopping on yet, but we are getting going. I am going to get everything published. So we're here. We'll get going in just a minute. If you're already on, if somebody's on, put a comment in here real quick because I want to see if this new software is working correctly. It says I should be able to see comments on it now, and I just am curious if I can. Oh, I can. I can't tell who it is, but I can see your comments. That's pretty cool. Okay, that's very exciting. Tanya, I have something sitting in my cart. I need to remember to finish that later. Oh, okay. So on the Switcher software now, I can see the comments. I just can't tell who asked them. So that's kind of cool. I think that's very exciting. Of course, then I have to turn that off to go see the different cameras. Okay. We're still exploring. Bear with me, guys. All right. It has been a very long day, so you guys have to bear with me today. That's all there is to it. For those that don't know, Tanya, who's in the chat, runs Graham's Glitter House, who is one of our spotlight vendors. So I'm going to give it just a few minutes for people to hop in here. I'm trying to watch the clock to get started right at 8. And then we will get going. So same as last time, supply-wise, we're really just dealing with our Mod Podge, foam brush, and scissors of choice. So we'll give it just a second to get going. So those that watched the other night, we got this far on this fabric cup, and we're just going to finish it off. Remember, ladies, I have like about a minute delay. Facebook has a built-in 30 seconds, and the software has about another 30 seconds. So you've got about a minute delay. Just keep that in mind. So this should be a pretty quick live. There's not a whole lot to this part of the process. We're going to do the bottom of the cup, the top rim of the cup, and start getting coats of Mod Podge on. And then basically you will just keep adding coats of Mod Podge whenever it feels dry to the touch. So you've got like 4 or 5 on. I usually just leave it on my dining room table, and then when I walk past it, I go, oh, it needs another coat of Mod Podge. It's dry. And then by the next day, it's plenty dry to epoxy it. Just like the other day, good evening. Hello, hello. Looks like people are coming in. Awesome. We used Dishwasher Safe the other day, so I'm using it again, but keep in mind it really doesn't matter what Mod Podge you use. whatever Mod Podge you have on hand, whatever Mod Podge you like. They all work pretty much the same. And I am just putting some Mod Podge in this plastic cup just because it's easier to work with that way for me. Now I'm gonna rearrange here just a little bit so you guys get a little bit better view. There we go. I think that's gonna work better. So I just like to work with the Mod Podge in a plastic cup. I find it easier and I get less of it on me than if I try and dip the whole foam brush into the jar. Personal preference on that one. So if you prefer a paintbrush, use a paintbrush, use whatever method you prefer. I like the foam brushes for this because they're cheap and I can throw them away. Your tumbler that you've gotten through part 1 on, and again, just like before, I prefer to work with mine on my football arm. You don't have to. You do you. Whatever. Some people prefer to just hold the tumbler. I find I get better grip with it on my football arm. And then again, we're just going to use scissors of choice. So I've got some decently sharp fabric scissors. And I've got some little skinny scissors, and I do have my rotary too. Could you use any type of fabric? You can. So the thing to keep in mind is for your first one, I would use like a cotton, something that doesn't have a lot of give and isn't super thick until you get comfortable with it. As you get comfortable with it, you can do anything. But a regular cotton, like a fabric square, like a fat quarter for quilting kind of thing, tends to work the best. So that would be at least where I would start. And if you go back to our part 1 video and event, you'll see a post on the event about fabric. I wouldn't start with stripes. I wouldn't start with white. I would start with cotton, preferably something that doesn't have a lot of give. This one has more give to it than I would like for starting. But the fabric is the best to start with, and then once you get comfortable, move on. Plus, you can get cotton for cheap. You can go get a fat quarter for like $1 at Walmart and get yourself started. So, all right, we are going to, we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to take, I'm going to actually just move my whole drying rack onto this because I'm actually going to work on my drying rack for this first part. So we're going to do the bottom of the tumbler, which is actually the top, the way it's sitting, first. So first of all, this is way more fabric than I need. Here's the bottom of my tumbler. I don't need all that. So I'm going to go ahead and just start by trimming a good chunk of this off. Now, one thing you will want to do, you will want to make a 2-inch circle-ish. I use 2-inch. It seems to fit on most of the cups. Measure your cup and see of your fabric. So if you need to do that with your scraps, cut your scraps accordingly. You know, or do it in the prior step when you had that excess that you put on the tumbler, which is what I did. I actually had my maker cut my circle, but Rachel Stroud, I don't know if you're on here. You just sent me a private message, but we're doing it right now. It will look wet after you apply the Mod Podge because it is wet until the Mod Podge dries. Tasha, yes, a bandana would work. You just want to make sure it's thick enough that it's not going to be super see-through, because some of those are pretty thin. But for the most part, they're good. So you want to have a give or take 2-inch circle, measure your cup, see what's going to work of your fabric. So I have that right here. If you're not using a maker or something that cuts the fabric, the upside down of the Mod Podge lid is generally a pretty good size. That covers most of our tumblers. Oh, I don't know why it does it after it dries. Mine doesn't after it dries. Which kind of Mod Podge are you using? So now we're going to take this top part or bottom part and we're going to cut some little slits all the way around. Just going to, I'm trying to think how you can see this. Let's see. There we go. So we're just going to take the scissors and stop at the metal. So where your tumbler is, and we're just going to snip. This is why I say you want some good sharp scissors. Preferably ones that are sharp all the way to the tip. And we're just going to cut some strips. So, and we're going to cut the whole thing in strips. The narrower your strips, the smoother it's going to lie. This fabric has a lot of give, so I feel like I can make my strips a little bit fatter. But I'm just going all the way around, cutting strips. I hope that shows up decently well. And I'm gonna actually, bear with me ladies, I'm gonna raise you up. Whoopsies. And put you over the top of this and see if you can get a slightly better angle. All right, if I made anyone sick, I'm sorry. All right, there we go. Sorry, fiddling with camera angles. I'm trying to get you guys where you can see it the best, so bear with me. If I made anyone sick during that, I'm sorry. All right, so now I've got this bare bottom and I've got my tabs, and I'm gonna take just my foam brush and I'm gonna start by just putting some Mod Podge right here on the cup part. Again, I tend with these to dab it more than brush it, but however works for you. Whatever works for you. And I don't feel the need to cover the entire thing at once either. I'll do it in sections, but you know, some people prefer to do it all at once. And then I'm just gonna push this strip down. Okay? And then the next strip. And then the next strip. So they're gonna start to overlap some. And that's okay. That's why we cut slits, so that they would overlap cleanly. So again, I mentioned this fabric has some more give. So I'm trying really hard not to stretch it. Ideally, I should have probably put heat bond on this fabric before I did this, but I didn't. got this one spot where this Mod Podge dried really thick, so I'm gonna come back and fix that. I'll show you how to fix that in a second. And in the meantime, I'm gonna start from the other side. Wow, there's such a delay. I honestly have used everything under the sun. I have used the gloss, I've used the matte, I've used the outdoor in the green, I've used the extreme glitter. Actually, Jessica, takes less epoxy because you have so much Mod Podge that it shouldn't be getting to your fabric. If your epoxy gets to your fabric, it's gonna leave grease spots. So you really don't want your epoxy to get to the fabric, so it shouldn't take very much epoxy. Glitter takes the most. All right, so we're gonna give that a second to start to set. We're gonna fix this little knobby do over here where it got too hard, too fast. Okay. Guys, if I miss any other questions, I know we've got some mods in the chat they can answer, and then I'll also go back and look for any questions that I left unanswered. With this delay, sometimes I miss them, or I see them after, and I'm not really answering your question because the timing isn't right. So bear with me on that. All right, I'm going to give that just a second to sort of set. This little piece is still bugging me because it's hard. I think I'm just going to cut it out. There. And you want to focus on the part where the cup meets the bottom, but you're not really worried about how it looks on this end because we're going to cover that with that circle. So you want it to be nice and smooth on this edge, but you're really not worried about the middle. This part feels like it's got a lot of excess fabric, so I'm just going to trim them down a little bit too, because my circle is going to cover that. And I'm just going to let that set for a second or two. And while that is setting, we'll start working on the top part. You're good, Christina. So we're going to start working on this top rim of the tumbler. So this is where, again, some really sharp scissors. And I like the skinny little scissors. But again, it's personal preference on whatever sharp scissors you like to work with, or you have on hand, or both. So what we're going to do is just cut as close to this rim as we can. Now, this is another good place for your rotary blade. If you're somebody who uses and likes the rotary blade, lay your tumbler down, rotary blade it. Take your, your pick. Trying to see if I can do it this way for you guys, but so if you like the rotary blade, I'm on my self-healing cutting mat, And I'm just gonna use basically the tumbler as my guide. And I'm gonna just keep it as tight to that tumbler as I can. It is not gonna be all the way, but it's gonna give me a good straight cut. And I gotta turn it over, sorry ladies, I am right-handed and you are on the wrong side to see this, so let me just finish that piece up. Okay, and then I'm still going to take my scissors to fix up the spots. So I'm still, even with my rotary blade, I'm going to come back with these little tiny scissors and get my things really clean. Tiffany, we have done some glitter and ink videos. We're going to continue to do techniques over here. But I would encourage you to look over at our epoxy mixology group, our sister group. It's pinned in our announcements because they're going to be doing a lot of your basics and your supplies. Oh no, my football's always abused. My dogs or my kids, one or the other, got a hold of them. So I like these Cricut scissors. Yes, I'm a Cricut loyalist. Sorry, Silhouette people, but I like Cricut's tools. Not necessarily their software as much, but I really like their tools. I like this, and I like their knife blade a lot. So I'm gonna take these scissors, Dollar Tree, Randy. These are just nice sharp fabric shears that are super small. And I'm going to come back and get really tight to the top of the tumbler. Just really tight to the top. Now, some people really like, there's a tool out there, I should know the name of it, that would do this for you with like a 1/4 inch rim or whatever. Personal preference. Another trick, if your fabric permits it and it's not too masculine, would be to take your like glitter tape and use that on this top edge. Then if you're cutting slightly below the rim of the cup, it wouldn't matter as much because you're going to cover it with glitter tape. So that's my other beginner trick if the top rim really is an issue for you. Now what we want to do, we want to take our Mod Podge and make sure we've got this top rim really good. So we're looking for anywhere where the fabric is pulling away from the tumbler. And we want to make sure we get Mod Podge in it and stuck, because those are all spots where if the fabric's pulled away, the epoxy can get behind it. So I like to take some Mod Podge and just dab it all the way around. And then I will actually, if you haven't noticed, I use my fingers. I just accept that when I'm working on a cup, I'm gonna have Mod Podge and epoxy and whatever on my fingers. And I work across this top rim, feeling with my finger for any spot where the fabric is separating. So this one actually is really good, but sometimes you'll get a spot where you have a little lift, you had an air bubble or whatever. And one of the tricks there is, if you can disguise it in the pattern of the fabric, is to just cut a little slit somewhere and let that air bubble out and then kind of lay it over itself. So yes, I have a bunch of Mod Podge streaks on the inside of this cup. Not going to worry about it. I'll worry about it when I clean the rims. Because I'm going to get more Mod Podge in it. Guaranteed. So here's one sort of spot, if you can see right here where we had this seam, we've got a little bit where it's popped up. Right there. So I'm just going to make sure I have lots of Mod Podge there. I'm going to press it down and just give it a second so it sticks. Wicked Shimmer Supply. There you go. That's the tool. Thank you, Karen. I have never used it. I am a full coverage girl, and I believe it stops at 1/4 of an inch. So I just have never used it. So I'm just going all the way around this top rim, making sure it's sealed really well and not worrying about the fact that there's Mod Podge on the inside. Now I do want to make sure I don't have like a thick clump on the top of the fabric, but I'm not worried about it being perfect. It's still wet and I'm going to come over the entire cup in a second. So I don't care that you can see like my finger streaks in it at this point. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and flip this, put my football back in, flip this over. We're going to go back to this bottom, and I'm going to go ahead and that circle that we cut, I forgot I'm still zoomed in, sorry ladies. We're going to go ahead and put it on. So again, I just tend to like dab with my Mod Podge with the foam brush more than brush it on at this point, at this stage of the game. And I just use my finger. If you really have an issue with your fingers having Mod Podge on it, then maybe I'm not the right tutorial for you, but you get the idea. All right, and then now we're just gonna start sealing this puppy. So we're gonna cover him in a coat of Mod Podge, and then I will come back when I notice that he's dry later and add more Mod Podge until he's got 3, 4, 6, however many coats before I go, he looks good. I would say you need at least probably 3 to 4, 3 more coats, 4 total coats on top of your fabric. More isn't gonna hurt, but you want at least that much. Now, if you had bubbles that you still needed to work out with fabric, you can work on them when the fabric is wet with Mod Podge. That's gonna give you a little bit of working time because it's wet and pliable and you can move it. The same is not true of paper, by the way. The paper will just rip. The fabric will not. I had to put some more Mod Podge in the cup in case you... So as I'm doing these full stripes, I'm just making sure that I pick up where I left the fingerprints at the bottom. And then once this has a good 4+ coats of epoxy, of Mod Podge on it, it'll be ready to epoxy. So each coat hereafter, I will check the rim, but not necessarily do it to quite the same extent that I did here. And then coat the entire piece of fabric, including the bottom. So while we're doing this, since we know there's a delay, are there any other questions? So we will get this last set of this scheduled where we will actually epoxy this cup soon. Over on Mixology, they have a series beginning on cup prep and taping, which I believe is Saturday at 7:30 Eastern and Tuesday? If Kylan is still on, she can correct me. Or Karen, you might know. Whoever knows for sure. But if you go over to the Mixology group, they will have all those in their events too, I'm sure. So for any of our brand new users, when we go through and we're approving members, a lot of you tell us that you have never used epoxy before. You're brand new, you've never used it. Either you've bought it or you're still doing research and you're not sure where to start. So our Mixology group is a great place to start for that. They're gonna be your super basics. They're gonna be your how do I mix epoxy? What do I need? What temperature does it need to be? All those very beginning questions. And this group is gonna become more about your technique and your types of tumblers and things like that. And that's just so that those of you that we see joining us that say you've never touched epoxy before, we just don't want you to get lost. We don't want your questions to get missed. There's 29,000 of us in here right now. This is actually a stretchy knit. This one right here is a stretch. I'll show you in a second with a better piece. Hold on. Let me finish this coat. So I just noticed I got a little bubble. I've got a little bubble. That's okay. That's not bad. So if you get these little bubbles like this, where the fabric is bubbled up a little bit, while it's wet with Mod Podge is a good time to work that out. So press it down. If it's a bubble that you actually need to move the air to the edge, this is just the time to work it because your fabric is wet and therefore easier to work with. Yes, we're going to let it dry in between coats, basically until it's dry to the touch. And then after our last coat, we are going to make sure it dries for a full 24 hours before we epoxy it. So what you do not want is to get your epoxy on and still have wet Mod Podge because it will make your epoxy cloudy. So I will just leave that there, and then when I notice it's dry in a little bit, I'll throw another coat on. You know, once it's dry to the touch, you can add another coat. but you want to give it a good 24 hours between Mod Podge and epoxy. Somebody was asking about knit. This fabric I'm working with right now has a lot of stretch to it. It's basically a knit. And it's not my first choice of fabric. One thing I would say, if you're working with a knit that has a lot of stretch that you're having a hard time with, get some heat bond stabilizer and just the iron-on kind, and iron it on first. Just stabilize your fabric, make it easier to work with. Let me see who else had some questions. If there are any other questions that I missed, feel free to repost them. So we're just going to let him sort of dry for the moment. Any other questions while we're at it? I just noticed that I've got this little popping up spot again. So I'm just sort of holding him down so he will stick. Any other questions? So another thing you may want nearby is baby wipes or paper towels, because I'm wiping my fingers on scrap fabric, which is probably not ideal. I'm not seeing any other questions. So if anyone else has any questions, speak now or forever hold your peace. All right, okay, can you apply glitter on top of the epoxy? Yes. I have one where I've done that. If you use the micro fine glitter in your epoxy, or you can even use regular glitter and just not put a ton of it in your top coat of epoxy, works really well. I have a flowered cup that you've probably seen in some of my lives that is that way. There is most definitely a delay, Lisa. There's about a minute delay. Which is why I'm kind of waiting after I ask. I don't want to cut anybody off if there's questions that are coming in that I'm waiting on. Yep, adding glitter in the epoxy. That's what I prefer to do too. And I know several of our recommended vendors have the microfine glitter. I know for sure Graham's Glitter House, who's on our list, has it. They call theirs stripper dust. It's the super ultra mega fine if you're looking for that. But I usually I've used just regular epoxy too. I mean regular glitter. Oh, fine glitter, and put it in there. All right, so I'm not seeing any other questions come in, but if you have any that come up, feel free to leave them in the video or over on the event. And we will actually, did I ever copy this to the event? Nope. The replay will be over on the event page. And feel free to leave your questions and we will cycle back to them. If you leave hashtag replay, it will help us out seeing those comments to answer those questions. And feel free to tag us as well. Yeah, so for those of you that are new, I just saw somebody else and the name scrolled up before I got a chance to see it, who said you're brand new to the cup making. Be sure to check out our mixology group, and Kylan or one of our other mods, if you're on, if you'll post the link to that. Otherwise, you can find it in the announcements. And that's going to be your super basics. That group is designed specifically for those of you that come in and say, I haven't made my first cup yet. Give or take about a fat quarter. Not even. A fat quarter gives you enough to make 2 cups probably. It's going to depend a little bit on the size of your cup too. A 20 versus a 30. This is on a 30 ounce Arctic. Nope, this is on a 30 ounce Ozark. Be sure to go back and watch video 1 of this series. You will see where I showed you about how much we used. I want to say we used about a 12 by 12-ish piece because I cut it on this cutting mat. All right, I don't see any other questions coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up for tonight. I promised you guys this would be a quick live, and it is. And be sure to check out the upcoming videos over on Mixology, and we will get the final coat, the first coat of epoxy on this scheduled, as well as we're going to continue talking about wraps. So we will talk about HTV. We did the 651 vinyl wrap that Kylan did last Saturday. We're going to finish up the fabric. We're going to do paper, HTV, etc. So we keep an eye out on the events tab. We're going to continue to get all those dates set as time moves on. And that's it. I'm going to go ahead and end this live. And as always, feel free to continue to leave comments if you're watching the replay or just something comes to mind later. And that's it. We'll see you guys later.